Chapter 5, Wolf of King Street. The blast door groaned as it sealed for the last time, cutting off the past like a guillotine. Silence followed, real, natural silence. No sirens. No lights. No humming machinery. Just the faint sound of wind, rustling through a city long abandoned by time and memory. The survivors, dozens of them, stood blinking in the sunlight. Some covered their eyes. Others just fell to their knees. And then they looked up. Lancaster. Still there. But wrong. The skyline wasn't gone, it was bent. Twisted street signs leaning like crosses. Windowless buildings, their bricks blackened from decades of soot and acid rain. Cars rusted into their own shadows. Trees growing sideways through shattered storefronts. They could see the old courthouse, barely standing. The spire of the old St. Mary's Church, still intact, but scorched near the base. The Penn Square fountain had turned green and crusted over, vines choking what was once a monument to hope. And the silence. It wasn't peace. It was the sound of a world that had moved on without them. The older members of the vault community, those who had remembered before, felt it deepest. They saw what remained of homes. Shattered fences. Schools now overgrown and hollow. Some walked into the street, past dust-covered skeletons still buckled in old-world cars. One woman dropped to her knees at a cracked sidewalk where a plaque still read, "Safe Streets for Children, 2076 Initiative." She sobbed until her breath gave out. This wasn't the America they remembered. This wasn't the Lancaster they loved. It was the scar left behind. A grave with street signs. And yet, they were out. Free. Johnny stood apart from the crowd, halfway up a crumbled embankment. Arms crossed. Watching them. He didn't smile. Didn't cry. Didn't speak. He just watched. Watched as the broken people he saved stepped into a broken world that might still have a chance. And even if the city was in ruins, even if the world was scarred forever, the vault was dead. And the living could finally begin. They stood in the middle of Prince Street, a crowd of the shell-shocked and the saved, staring out at a world that didn't look like a future, it looked like a punishment. The roads shimmered with chemical runoff. Flora that had once been native to the Lancaster Valley now swayed with an unnatural glow, stems twisted into spirals, leaves whispering in ways that made skin crawl. Off in the distance, something shrieked, not quite animal, not quite machine. Whatever it was, it reminded everyone that the world above hadn't gone still. And the water? Ponds that once cooled the edge of town now bubbled, green and reeking of metal. The Conestoga River was low, sick, and ran with a slick rainbow sheen across its surface. There was no clean water. No food. Only ruin. The children clung to their parents. The elders whispered prayers. And the rest panicked. Some started yelling, others sobbed. Two men began arguing over direction. A teenage boy tried to sprint east, saying he saw clean fields until he collapsed from exhaustion within a block. This wasn't freedom. It was another cage. A cage without walls. Without beds. Without hope. And then Johnny stepped forward. Still limping. Still scorched. But standing tall. He raised his hand, not shouting, not demanding. But the silence fell all the same. I know it's not what you thought. His voice cut through the dry air like gravel wrapped in fire. We were told the surface was gone. That there was nothing left. That the vault was the only chance at survival. He turned slowly, looking over them. At the mothers holding children. At the former laborers. At the teachers. The cooks. The dreamers. They lied. But this is real. We're out. We made it. He looked south, toward the hazy sprawl beyond the broken rooftops. We need shelter. And I know just the place. He pointed toward the southern edge of Lancaster. Toward the old loom mill, a titan of rusted steel and broken glass that once fed hundreds of families before the bombs. The locals who remembered the pre-war days nodded slowly. It was massive. Reinforced. Multi-leveled. Built like a fortress. And more importantly, empty. We move now. Get everyone inside. Secure the perimeter. Break into the offices, find tools, wire, meds, anything. No more waiting to die. He looked at them, eyes sharp with fire. We survived the vault. Now we survive the world. Slowly, they began to move. Some carried the weak. Others gathered what little they could from the surrounding ruins, old tarps, tools, cracked solar lanterns from rusted out homes. And as the sun began to dip behind the shattered skyline, the people of Vault 717, survivors of darkness, marched toward the old mill. A second chance. A new stronghold. And behind them, the wind carried the scent of ash and memory. But ahead, a future. Not promised. Not easy. But theirs. The loom mill stood like a survivor itself. Old brick, half choked in ivy and time, windows shattered in places, roof partially collapsed over one wing. But the bones of it held. It was shelter. Not safe. Not clean. Not warm. But it stood. The heavy iron doors were rusted but gave under effort. Inside, the floor was scattered with warped machinery, forgotten crates, and the smell of damp concrete and dust. A few broken down offices. Old lockers. A courtyard in the back choked with mutated weeds, but open to the sky. It was enough. Barely. By nightfall, the survivors had done what they could. Stripped wire for cooking grates. Blocked windows with plastic sheeting and scrap wood. lit controlled fires in the loading dock using broken desks and archive binders, posted watchers on the roof with old riot gear scavenged from a collapsed police substation 2 blocks over. But the real problem wasn't heat. It wasn't shelter. It was life. The vault rations they'd carried out were already being rationed tighter. Not enough for more than 3 days, and even that was stretching it. Water. A dozen sealed containers. 2 filtration canisters. A few bloodied canteens. Maybe 48 hours. No one said it aloud, but the look was in every eye. We're not going to make it unless something changes. Fast. Johnny stood in what had once been the main warehouse floor, now filled with tarps and the hum of exhausted people trying not to fall apart. A little girl clutched a bundle of canned carrots like it was a doll. A man was counting rations with shaking hands. 2 women argued over a rusted wrench. They were slipping not because of weakness, but because they had never been allowed to prepare for this part. The vault taught them how to survive underground, not how to live again. He stepped outside. The courtyard was overgrown. Vines, thorn brush, sickly stalks that hissed faintly in the wind. Some were edible. Most were not. He kicked one of the roots aside and looked to the south horizon. They needed a source. A clean spring. A well. Something. They'd survive tonight. But tomorrow? They'd have to hunt. That evening, a meeting was called. By then, the fire barrels were lit. People huddled in groups. A few stood on lookout from the roof. The younger ones, those born entirely in Vault 717, sat closest to the flame, eyes wide with everything they'd never seen before. Johnny stood on a broken assembly crate, arms crossed, staring at them all. This place is temporary. It's shelter, not salvation. What we brought with us isn't enough. We all know it. Silence. Starting tomorrow, we're splitting into 4 teams. 1 for water. 1 for food. 1 for salvage. And 1 to hold this place down. He looked toward the back of the crowd. We know Lancaster. We lived here. Some of you remember the layout. Wells. Stores. Hunting grounds. Even old survival caches from the war. We will find a water source. We will find food. And when we do, this place becomes a home. There were no cheers. Not yet. But people stood taller. And that was enough. In the dark, someone hung a Vault 717 banner from a pipe over the door. Not as pride, but as a reminder. They had come from the shadows. And now, finally, they were ready to build something in the light. Johnny stood in the half-lit chamber of the old mill, shoulders squared, face cut in half by the glow of a flickering barrel fire. The room was quiet. Listening. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You're all focused on food, on water, on warmth. And you should be. He looked around the space at the people clutching children, at the tired shoulders, the sunken eyes, the silent prayers still hanging in the smoke. But that thing back in the vault, that monster, his jaw tightened. That was just one creation. One freak show born from FEV and lies and radiation and whatever else Vault Tech brewed down there for kicks. He let it sit. Let them remember the shrieks, the shape, the fear. By that logic, there's hundreds more. Failed lab projects, twisted animals, other humans who've been breathing the wrong air for too long. Raiders who eat first and talk never. This isn't a fresh start. It's a goddamn arena. He stepped off the crate and walked to the fire, crouching to pick up a rusted steel rod, part of an old mill spindle. He held it like a weapon, not a symbol. We stick to the city. For now. Buildings give cover. Familiar roads. Defensive positions. Out there. He pointed toward the ruined county beyond the horizon. That's death. And worse, we don't know what kind. He paused, lowering the rod. But we can't stay still. Water's still our first move. He straightened again, looking at the map they'd scrawled on the mill wall using burnt wood and a scavenged clipboard. A crude sketch of downtown Lancaster. Main roads. Known vault positions. Collapsed zones. Old city systems. The pre-war water system, it ran deep. Almost as deep as the vault. We can use that. We find the old water station, trace the pipelines. Maybe, just maybe, we hit a reserve deep enough to have survived all this shit. Old well pressure stations. Aquifer lines. Anything not exposed to the surface fallout. He turned, scanning the crowd again. At dawn, we move. Group of 6. Heavy gear. Long pipes. Breathers if you've got 'em. We're gonna follow that water line like it's the last clean thought on Earth. He tossed the metal rod onto the floor. It rang out across the concrete. We survive this. Not by hiding. Not by praying. But by outsmarting everything they ever built to kill us. No one clapped. They weren't there yet. But someone nodded. And then another. And then an old man stood up, cracked his back, and said, "Used to work the main pumps. Water station B's still out there. Buried, but she's out there." That was all it took. By morning, they'd have a heading. And with it, a purpose. The next morning, just past dawn, a cold mist hung low over Lancaster's cracked streets like the earth hadn't yet decided whether to let go of the dead. The loom mill stood quiet behind them, wrapped in silence and watch duty. The people left behind watched through broken windows, waiting for news, for hope, before the sound of footsteps returning instead of disappearing. Johnny led the group of 6 down Queen Street. No one spoke. The world felt heavier now. Not just from the silence, or the decay, or the glow on some of the plants that definitely hadn't looked like that 2 centuries ago. But because now they knew the truth. The monsters were real. They weren't myths. They weren't stories whispered in the dark. They were out here. And probably watching. Their destination was the old Lancaster Water Station Station B, buried beneath a long-collapsed municipal facility near the edge of Reservoir Park. One of the older men on the team, Elliot Klein, had worked there before the bombs. Maintenance supervisor. He remembered the back entrances. The sublines. The fact that the well shaft dropped nearly 500 feet straight down. Deep enough, he claimed, to have avoided the fallout. Maybe. Hopefully. They passed a rusted-out pre-war van, half swallowed by a tree growing sideways through the chassis. Past storefronts with mannequins melted in place, watching with empty, glassless sockets. At one intersection, a dead Brahmin lay bloated in the center of the street, no visible wounds. Just dead. Like it gave up. Finally, they reached the old site. What had once been a secure water facility was now a collapsed tangle of concrete, rebar, and trees growing through pipe walls. But beneath the rot the structure held. The reinforced substation door, embedded into a concrete embankment, was still shut tight. Half the keypad had rusted off. The hatch was fused shut by time and dirt. Johnny looked at Klein. Klein looked at the panel and smirked. They put a bypass in. Idiots never trusted the electronics. Should still be a manual valve under the west grate. Took 20 minutes of digging and a crowbar salvaged from the mill's boiler room. But eventually, the old grate screeched open, and a narrow crawl space revealed itself beneath a tangle of root-webbed soil. The water station was still there. Dark. Damp. Breathing with condensation. But intact. The air changed the deeper they went. Less metallic. Less rot. And then, the sound. Water. Still flowing. Not fast. Not loud. But moving. They reached the lower chamber. A rust-lined maintenance tunnel that dropped into a concrete vault where massive pipes met at a central flow hub. A pressure gauge still blinked dim, but functional. Unbelievable. Johnny ran a gloved hand under the edge of a backup filtration line. The water came out cold. He sniffed it. Nothing acidic. No film. He looked at Elliot. Tell me this isn't a dream. Klein dropped to one knee, pulled a compact field tester from his bag, one of the few things left from the vault worth a damn. He ran the probe. Waited. And then exhaled long, shaking. Deep source. Old aquifer. Pressure's low, but it's alive. This water, it's clean. Johnny stood, looked back at the rest of the crew. One of them was crying. He didn't blame them. They'd found it. The lifeline. Not just for today, but for tomorrow. And now, the real work would begin. Pipes. Pumps. Transport. Building not just a shelter, but a colony. Something that could last. And all of it, starting with this quiet, dark, forgotten room, where life still ran beneath death. Boots slammed against the wet concrete. The echo snapped everyone's heads toward the western hallway of the substation. Alex Quinn, the youngest of the scouting party, no more than 20, breathless, face smudged with dust and rust, came barreling into the main chamber, his hands shaking, clutching a long, stained scroll of laminated paper nearly torn in half from age. "Johnny, Johnny." His voice cracked. It wasn't panic. It was something worse. Hope. The kind of hope that made people afraid to believe it was real. He held the paper out, almost reverently. "It's a map." Johnny stepped forward, slowly. Took it. Unfurled it. Klein leaned over, eyes wide, lips moving without sound. A network. A whole goddamn network. Color-coded lines. Access symbols. Vault-era annotation overlays. They weren't just looking at Station B. They were looking at every surviving deep well and pressure stabilizer across the entire Lancaster County grid. Some marked as compromised. Others tagged with question marks. But at least 5 were marked. Stable/tested/secure, vault priority access. And one had a handwritten note next to it, yellowed and faded. Emergency reserve, EST capacity 43 plus years, do not disclose to civilian network. Johnny stared at the map like it was a holy relic. Because in a way, it was. Not just survival. Not just a drink. Infrastructure. A future. He looked up at the group. Their eyes wide. Silent. "We've got a whole vein running beneath this place. Not just a drink for tomorrow. Not just enough for next week." He tapped the map. Decades. Enough for crops. Enough for cleaning. Enough to rebuild. He held the map high. They buried it. Hid it. Told us the surface was death. Told us the land was dead. But under all that rot, they left the key. And now we have it. Klein wiped his eyes. Someone whispered, "We're going to live." But Johnny wasn't done. He rolled the map slowly, deliberately. "This changes everything. We're not just going to survive out here." He looked toward the tunnel mouth, the way back to the mill, to the people still huddled in tarp blankets waiting for death or miracle. "We're going to build a world they could never control. And we start with water. Then walls. Then food." He grinned. for the first time in days. Not wild. Not rage-fueled. Visionary. And when we're strong enough. He looked north. Back toward the ruins. Toward whatever other vaults or rot might still breathe in the cracks. We take everything else back, too. Until over the next few days they saw something. It started with one. A figure on the far edge of the city ruins just past the old train yard, standing under a collapsed billboard, still as stone. At first, no one noticed. Then someone watching from the mill rooftop spotted it. There's someone out there. But it didn't wave. Didn't speak. Didn't move. Just stood. Watching. The next day, there were three. One on the north rail line. Another shambling through the overgrown lot near an old fast food joint. The third, perched on a rooftop. Howling. Not words. Not language. Just sound. A scream of rotting lungs and forgotten identity. By day 4, there were dozens. Moving on the outskirts. Never close. Never crossing into the mill's new perimeter. But always visible. Always lurking. Some sat and stared. Some wandered in endless circles, like dogs caught in thought loops. A few seemed docile, hunched over old cans and rusted scrap like they remembered being people once. But the violent ones were different. Their eyes glowed. Their teeth were wrong like they'd cracked open from the inside. Their skin peeled in layers, but they didn't bleed. They snarled at the wind. Fought each other. Chased shadows. And sometimes howled in perfect unison, long, low, and unnatural. Ghouls. The word finally passed through the settlement like a slow-moving virus of memory. Some of the elders remembered them from stories. Vault files had whispered about radiation-ravaged survivors, mutated beyond recognition, driven mad by time and sickness. But this was no story. They were real. And they were gathering. Johnny stood at the upper stairwell of the mill with a pair of salvaged binoculars, scanning the horizon. One of the ghouls was just standing in the middle of a cracked road, staring at a rusted fire hydrant. Behind it, 3 others. Sniffing the ground. Following scent. They were tracking. They haven't attacked, Johnny muttered. Not yet. Elliot stood behind him, shotgun across his chest. That's the worst part. If they were dumb, we'd already be dead. But this is patience. They held a meeting that night. Every able-bodied settler was there. Rusted tools. A few scavenged pistols. Blades. Rebar. Some still wore Vault 717 jumpsuits, sleeves torn off, patchwork armor bolted on. Johnny stood in the center. They're out there. Some are mindless. Some aren't. Some are watching us. Some are waiting. Either way they're not friendly. And they're not going away. He looked around the firelit circle. So we adapt. Again. Double watch at night. Everyone learns a weapon. We reinforce the fences and we start digging traps around the perimeter. And if one gets inside we don't hesitate. No one objected. They'd seen enough already. But what no one knew, what even Johnny didn't know yet, was that not all ghouls had forgotten who they once were. Some remembered everything. And some wanted the city back. But Johnny, he needed a gun and fast. The old gun store sat on the corner of Mulberry and West Walnut, half collapsed, its signage scorched and barely legible through years of grime and soot. The windows were long gone, the interior overrun with dust, vines, and half-eaten mannequins in faded camo. But Johnny stepped through it like he knew it was waiting for him. He didn't need a shopping list. Didn't care about pipe rifles or busted shotguns or crack scopes. He went straight to the reinforced back cabinet, kicked it once, then pried it open with a piece of iron shelf bracket. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and still smelling like vengeance preserved, the .44 Magnum. The weight of it was perfect. Heavy. Cold. Balanced like it had been waiting for someone who wouldn't flinch. He cracked the chamber open. 6 rounds still inside. Hand-loaded, old-world brass, fat with intent. He held it up to the light, what little filtered through the hole in the roof, and exhaled, long and slow. "Goddamn." Elliot whistled behind him. "You sure you're not overcompensating?" Johnny smiled. "This ain't for intimidation. This is for guarantees." He spun the cylinder once, snapped it closed with a clean flick, and holstered it into a handmade side rig fashioned from a torn Vault-Tec harness and a fire hose belt. He looked at the glassless doorway out toward the city, toward the ghouls, the ruins, the monsters born from mankind's forgotten sins. First bullets for warning. Seconds for mercy. The rest. He smirked. That's for the ones who should have stayed dead. As they looted the rest of the shop boxes of ammo, cleaning kits, knives, even a cracked riot shield, Johnny turned back once more to the wall behind the counter. Someone had carved into the plaster with a combat knife. When the world forgets you, carve your name into its skull. Johnny nodded once. Sounds about right. Then he stepped out, .44 at his side, and headed back to the mill. Because Lancaster had been reborn. And now, so had justice.